I never told my mother what was truly hidden inside the secret warehouse my father left me. When she remarried a man who saw me as nothing more than a stubborn obstacle to his financial dreams, I made sure he would never find the key. But while I was deployed thousands of miles away, I watched on my phone as he cut the lock. He thought he was breaking into a rusty storage unit to steal scrap metal. He had no idea he was breaking into a federal crime scene and sealing his own fate. I am Dominique, 32 years old, a logistics officer for the United States Air Force. Silence and discipline are the cornerstones of my life. But at 3 in the morning on a rainy Tuesday in Germany, the silence of my quarters was shattered not by a bass siren, but by the frantic buzzing of my personal phone. It was the silent alarm from South Chicago. My heart did not race. My training kicked in immediately. I picked up the phone and opened the secure surveillance app linked to the legacy my father Otis had left behind. The screen glowed with a grainy black and white feed. There they were. Standing in the pouring rain outside Warehouse 17 were two figures I knew better than I wanted to. My stepfather Caleb, wearing a raincoat that likely cost more than my brother's car, and my brother Darius holding a pair of massive bolt cutters. The phone rang in my hand. It was Mr. Henderson, the property manager, and my father's oldest friend. His voice was trembling. "Dom," he whispered, "you need to call the police right now. They are here. They have a massive truck backed up to the loading dock. Caleb is shouting that he has power of attorney from your mother, and he has the right to liquidate the property. He is going to cut the chain. I can go down there with my shotgun and stop them." I stared at the screen. I watched Caleb gesture wildly, his face twisted with greed even through the pixelated image. He looked like a man who thought he had finally won. He thought the warehouse was filled with old car parts and copper wire he could sell to pay off his secret debts. He was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how a pair of bolt cutters destroyed my stepfather's life. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Do not go down there. Put the shotgun away. Do not call the local police. Let them cut the chain. Let them open the door." But Dom Henderson stammered, "They will steal everything." "No, Mr. Henderson," I replied, watching Darius clamp the jaws of the cutter onto the hardened steel padlock. "They are not stealing anything. They are walking into a trap I set 6 months ago. If they cross that yellow line, they are not just thieves, they are federal prisoners. Let them in. I have been waiting for this moment ever since Caleb walked into our lives." I switched views to camera 2, zooming in on the loading dock. The high-definition night vision captured every raindrop hitting Tiffany's blow-dried blonde hair. She was holding her latest model iPhone up the ring light attachment blindingly bright in the darkness. She was not just breaking the law, she was broadcasting it. I watched in disbelief as she adjusted her angle to make sure her face looked sympathetic while my brother struggled in the background. "Hey guys, welcome back to Tiff is Truth," she chirped into the phone, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that I could hear clearly through the high-gain microphones I had installed last winter. "You would not believe what we are dealing with tonight. We are finally taking back what belongs to my husband's family. See that warehouse behind me? My husband's selfish sister, Dominique, has been hoarding it for years." She paused for effect, glancing at the comments rolling in on her screen. "Exactly," she said to her audience. "She is single bitter and thinks because she wears a uniform, she is better than everyone else. She is just a selfish old maid who wants to see my Darius struggle. But not tonight. Tonight we are taking what is ours." Behind her, Caleb was pacing back and forth in his expensive trench coat, careful to avoid the muddy puddles. He looked like a shark smelling blood. He snapped at my brother, his voice harsh and impatient. "Hurry up, boy. The truck costs money by the hour. We need to load everything before the sun comes up. Stop playing with it and cut the damn thing." Darius grunted, putting his entire weight on the massive bolt cutters. The chain was thick, hardened steel, a remnant of the heavy industry days. I watched my brother, a man who used to protect me on the playground, now sweating and straining to rob me. He looked tired. But he also looked desperate, driven by the lies Caleb and Tiffany had fed him. Tiffany spun around, making sure to get the peeling paint of the warehouse door in the frame. "Look at this place," she sneered into the camera, gesturing vaguely at the brickwork. "She let it rot just to spite us. We are doing the neighborhood a favor, really. We are going to sell the junk inside, pay off our bills, and maybe finally take that trip to Cabo we deserve. Hit those heart emojis if you support family justice." She truly believed her own lies. She thought she was the hero of this story. She had no idea that the rot she complained about was a deliberate camouflage I paid thousands to maintain. She had no idea that inside those walls was not junk, but a climate-controlled facility housing millions of dollars in sensitive equipment. Then a loud snap echoed through the audio feed. The lock gave way. Darius stumbled forward, nearly dropping the heavy cutters on his foot. "Got it," he panted, wiping rain and rust from his eyes. Caleb's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam that made my stomach turn. Finally, he hissed, stepping over a puddle. "Open it. Let us see what the old man was hiding from us." Tiffany turned the camera back to her face, flashing a triumphant, rehearsed smile. "This is it, guys. The moment of truth. Justice is served." I took a sip of water, my hand perfectly steady as I watched them grab the handle of the rolling door. They were about to open Pandora's box. But before that metal door rolls up and ruins their lives, you need to understand why they felt so entitled to my property. You need to understand the year of hell they put me through that led to this precise moment. To understand why my brother was sweating over a padlock in the middle of the night, we have to go back to the day we put my father in the ground. It was exactly 1 year ago. The funeral parlor was suffocating, filled with the scent of lilies and the murmurs of distant relatives who only showed up when there was a possibility of an inheritance. My father, Otis, had been a quiet man, a man of grease gears and few words. He was the only person in this family who actually saw me, and burying him felt like burying the only ally I had in this world. After the service, the reading of the will took place in the lawyer's mahogany-paneled office downtown. The atmosphere was tense. My mother, Patricia, sat in the center chair, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She was mourning, yes, but I could see the calculation in her gaze as she looked around the room. Darius sat next to her, already scrolling through sports car listings on his phone, leg bouncing with impatience. They were not waiting to hear my father's last words. They were waiting for a payout. The lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Thompson, who had known my father for 30 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He began reading in a monotone voice. "To my wife, Patricia, I leave the family home on Euclid Avenue, the life insurance policy, and the entirety of my savings accounts." Mom let out a breath. She had been holding a small, satisfied smile, touching her lips, before she quickly composed herself. She had secured her comfort. She squeezed Darius's hand, whispering loud enough for me to hear, "See, I told you Daddy would take care of us." Then Mr. Thompson turned his gaze to me. His expression softened just a fraction. "And to my daughter Dominique, I leave Warehouse 17 in the Southside Industrial District, along with all its contents, equipment, and legal liabilities." The room went dead silent. Mom frowned, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "That old place," she scoffed, breaking the somber mood. "Otis never sold that dump. It has been sitting there rotting for 20 years. Why would he saddle her with that?" Darius laughed out loud. It was a cruel barking sound that echoed off the expensive walls. "Damn, Dom, Dad really played you. He left Mom the mansion and the cash, and he gave you a pile of rust. What are you going to do, open a scrapyard? Maybe you can melt it down to pay for your dry cleaning." I did not take the bait. I did not look at Darius. I kept my eyes on the heavy iron key Mr. Thompson slid across the desk. It looked ancient, but I knew the security system it bypassed was anything but. My father had whispered to me on his deathbed, "Keep the door closed, Dom. Keep it safe. It is your future. They will not understand, and they do not need to." I reached out and took the key. The metal was cold against my palm, grounding me. "I will take it," I said simply. my voice even. Mom shook her head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if my inheritance was a personal insult to her. Suit yourself, she said, standing up to leave. Just do not ask me for money when the property taxes come due. That eyesore is your problem now. Do not expect us to bail you out when you realize it is worthless. She walked out of that office believing I had been given a burden. She had no idea that the eyesore she despised generated more revenue in a single month than her beloved house was worth in a decade. But I kept my mouth shut. And that silence was exactly what left the door open for a predator like Caleb to enter our lives just 2 months later. It took exactly 8 weeks for the grief to vanish from my mother, his face replaced by a blush that looked entirely too teenage for a 60-year-old widow. She called a mandatory family dinner to introduce us to someone special. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I parked behind a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. It shined under the streetlights, screaming success and power. But my military training forces me to notice details others miss. On the rear passenger window, barely visible against the tint, was a small clear barcode sticker. Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I walked inside to find a stranger sitting in my father's favorite armchair. This was Caleb. He was 55, wearing a suit that was a shade too blue and a gold watch that was a size too big. He stood up when I entered, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth, but the warmth never reached his eyes. He introduced himself as a visionary investor, specializing in cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. To my mother, he sounded like Elon Musk. To me, he sounded like every spam email I automatically deleted. From the moment he shook my hand, I felt like I was being appraised, not greeted. His eyes did not linger on my face. They darted over my shoulder to the crystal chandelier in the foyer, then to the oil paintings on the wall. He was not looking at a home. He was conducting an inventory. Dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. Caleb sat at the head of the table, a spot that had remained empty since the funeral. He spent the first 20 minutes ignoring me completely, focusing his laser beam of attention on my mother. He held her hand across the roast chicken, telling her she was too radiant to be hidden away in this big lonely house. He called it love bombing, a tactic narcissists use to overwhelm their victims with affection before the abuse starts. My mother soaked it up like a dry sponge. Then he turned his sights on Darius. My brother, who had not held a steady job since the Obama administration, was suddenly being told he had the spirit of a lion. Caleb leaned in, his voice low and conspiratorial. You know, Darius, the traditional job market is a scam. Men like us, we are hunters. I see that hunger in you. I could use a man with your instincts in my new venture. Darius sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. For the first time in years, someone was validating his laziness as untapped potential. Caleb had him hooked in 5 minutes flat. Finally, Caleb turned to me. The warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by a cold, businesslike tone. Patricia mentioned there is another asset. A commercial property downtown. A warehouse. I believe I stopped eating. I looked him dead in the eye. It is not an asset, I said. It is a storage unit, and it is not for sale. Caleb laughed, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, everything is an asset, Dominique. You just have to know how to leverage it. Your mother and I were talking, and we think it is a shame to let prime real estate sit idle. Imagine what we could build for this family if we liquidated it and reinvested the capital into my crypto portfolio. He said we. He had been in our lives for 2 hours, and he was already claiming ownership of my father's legacy. My mother nodded along enthusiastically, completely under his spell. That was the moment I knew. This man was not here for love. He was here for a payday, and I was the only thing standing in his way. Caleb did not waste time with subtleties. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, leaned his elbows on the table, and clasped his hands together, like a judge delivering a verdict. The pleasantries of dinner were over. It was time for business. He looked at Darius, then at me, and finally settled his gaze on my mother, as if seeking her silent permission to begin the extraction process. Dominique. He started, his voice dripping with faux concern. We need to be practical. I have looked into the zoning laws for that industrial district. The land value is spiking. Right now, that warehouse is just a liability. It is bleeding property taxes and insurance costs that you simply cannot afford on a government salary. But if we sell now, we are looking at a substantial injection of liquid capital. I slowly placed my fork down the metal, clicking against the fine china. I saw where this was going, but I let him finish. I wanted to hear him say it. He gestured toward my brother, who was busy picking his teeth. Darius has a vision, Dominique. He wants to open a luxury car detailing franchise. It is a brilliant concept, but he needs seed money. If we sell that empty shell of a building your father left, we can fund Darius completely. We can secure his future. It is what Otis would have wanted. The mention of my father's name coming from his mouth felt like a physical slap. I looked at Darius. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his reflection in a spoon, already imagining himself the CEO of a company he did not work for. I am not selling, I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the room. Caleb's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before recovering. Now, Dom, do not be emotional. Think about the family. I am thinking about the family, I replied, locking eyes with him. I am thinking about how my father told me to keep that building. I am thinking about how Darius quit his last 3 jobs in under a month. And I am thinking about how you seem to have already spent the money from a property you do not own. The answer is no. That was the match in the powder keg. My mother slammed her hand down on the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. Dominique, she shouted. How dare you speak to him like that? Caleb is trying to help us. He is trying to fix the mess your father left behind. He is the man of this house now, and he wants what is best for this family. Why are you so selfish? You are holding on to a rotting pile of bricks while your brother needs help. I stood up, grabbing my purse. The air in the room felt suffocating thick with their entitlement and greed. He is not the man of my house, I said, pushing my chair back. And that warehouse is not a pile of bricks. It is mine. If Darius wants a business, tell him to fill out a job application like everyone else. I walked out of the dining room before they could see my hands shaking. Behind me, I heard Caleb murmur something soothing to my mother, probably telling her I was unstable or jealous. I knew then that I had not just refused a request. I had declared war. And as I drove away from the house I grew up in, I knew they would not stop asking. They would just stop asking nicely. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time of gratitude, but under Caleb's new regime, it had transformed into a hostage negotiation with turkey and stuffing. I had flown in from Germany on a 48-hour pass, exhausted and jet-lagged, hoping for a sliver of the home I used to know. Instead, I walked into an ambush orchestrated by my sister-in-law, Tiffany. Tiffany was a woman who weaponized femininity. She sat across from me at the dining table, wearing a pastel dress that cost more than my monthly housing allowance, looking at my short regulation haircut with undisguised pity. She did not see a logistics officer in the United States Air Force. She saw a woman who had failed at the only job she thought mattered, which was finding a husband to pay her bills. You look so tired, Dominique, she said loudly enough for the entire table to hear. Her voice was high-pitched and dripping with fake concern. I do not know how you do it. Living on a base, wearing those baggy uniforms every day, being around all those rough men. It is just so masculine. I could never do it. I need to feel like a woman, you know. I need to nurture a home. I slowly cut a piece of turkey, fighting the urge to tell her that the baggy uniform she despised protected the freedom she enjoyed. I just smiled tightly. It is a career, Tiffany, not a lifestyle choice. It pays well. Tiffany laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Well, not well enough to buy a house in a decent school district, apparently. Speaking of which, Darius and I saw the most adorable colonial in Oak Park yesterday. It has 4 bedrooms, a sunroom, and a huge backyard. It would be perfect for a nursery. The table went silent. This was the setup. I saw Caleb stop chewing, his eyes locking onto me. My mother perked up at the word nursery. "We are trying for a baby," Tiffany announced, placing a hand on her flat stomach. "But we cannot raise a child in that cramped apartment we are renting. We need a real home. We need stability. And we could have that house next month, if we just had the down payment." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes wide and innocent. "It is just such a shame, really. That warehouse of yours is sitting there collecting dust and graffiti. If you sold it, Darius and I could buy the house in Oak Park. Think about it, Dom. Mom could be 10 minutes away from her future grandchildren, instead of an hour." My mother let out a longing sigh. "Oh, that would be wonderful, to have the babies so close. I could visit every day." Tiffany nodded, driving the knife in deeper. "Exactly, Mom. But I guess Dom has other priorities. It feels like she is choosing a pile of rotting bricks over her own nephew. It is kind of heartless when you say it out loud, is not it?" I looked around the table. In under 2 minutes, Tiffany had rewritten reality. I was no longer the responsible daughter protecting a family asset. I was now the selfish villain standing between my mother and her grandchildren. I was the cold, unfeeling career woman denying my brother a home. The manipulation was masterful, and it made me sick to my stomach. I realized then that Tiffany was not just annoying, she was dangerous. The silence at the dinner table was broken only by the scraping of my mother's chair. She did not reprimand Tiffany for her cruelty. Instead, she looked at me with watery eyes and signaled for me to follow her into the kitchen. I stood up, feeling the weight of Caleb's smug stare burning into my back as I pushed through the swinging door. The kitchen was my mother's domain, usually filled with the smell of spices and the sound of her humming. Tonight it felt like an interrogation room. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run to drown out our voices, a trick she used to use when hiding secrets from my father. But this time, she was not hiding secrets for him. She was hiding lies for Caleb. She leaned against the granite counter, gripping the edge until her knuckles turned white. "Dominique," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I did not want to tell you this over the phone. I did not want to worry you while you were overseas. But I am sick." I froze. The anger I felt toward Tiffany evaporated, replaced by the instinctive fear of a daughter losing her only remaining parent. "What do you mean, Mom?" I asked, stepping closer. "It is my arthritis," she sobbed, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. "It has gotten so bad. Some days I cannot even walk up the stairs. The doctors say I need a special treatment, a new therapy that is not covered by insurance. It costs thousands a month." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Caleb has been paying for it out of his own pocket. He has been draining his investment accounts just to keep me mobile. He is too proud to tell you, but he is running out of money, Dom. If you sell the warehouse, you are not just helping Darius, you are saving me." For a moment, I almost believed her. I almost reached out to comfort her. But then I looked at her hands. The hands gripping the counter were steady. There was no swelling in her joints, no grimace of pain when she moved. And I remembered seeing her carry a 20-pound turkey out of the oven an hour ago without flinching. I took a deep breath. "Mom," I said calmly, "I have excellent military insurance. I can add you as a dependent. I can get you the best specialists in the country completely free. We do not need to sell the warehouse." Her face changed instantly. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "No," she snapped too quickly. "I do not want military doctors. I want my doctor. I want the treatment Caleb found for me. Why do you have to make this so difficult?" She took a step toward me, grabbing my shoulders. Her grip was strong, painfully strong. "Your father would be so disappointed in you, Dominique. He worked his whole life to build assets for this family. He did not leave you that building so you could hoard it like a miser. He wanted us to take care of each other. Why are you being so greedy?" The mention of my father felt like a physical blow to the chest. She was using the man who loved me most to manipulate me into funding a con artist. I gently removed her hands from my shoulders. "Dad left that warehouse to me because he knew I was the only one who would not sell it for a quick buck." I said, my voice cold and final. I am not selling. And tell Caleb to stop writing scripts for you. You are a terrible actor. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, not in pain from arthritis, but shaking with the rage of a manipulator who had just lost control. I knew then that the mother I loved was gone, replaced by a woman who would say anything to please her new husband. And I knew I had to protect myself. 2 days after I refused to fund my mother, is imaginary arthritis treatment, the first strike landed. I drove down to the warehouse on a gray, drizzly Saturday morning to perform a routine systems check. As I rounded the corner of the industrial park, my headlights swept across the corrugated metal door. I slammed on the brakes. Someone had taken a can of bright red spray paint and defaced the entire front entrance. Across the steel slats in jagged, angry letters 5 feet high was a single word: selfish. I sat in my car, the engine idling, staring at the accusation. It was not the work of local taggers. Gangs in Chicago have a specific style, a visual language of territory and power. This was clumsy, emotional, and personal. It was the handwriting of a man who had never been told no in his life. It was Darius. I stepped out of the car, the rain chilling my neck. I walked up to the service door, intending to scrub the paint off before the city fined me. I reached into my pocket for the key, but when I tried to slide it into the padlock, it hit a wall. I peered closely at the keyhole. It was filled to the brim with hardened white residue. Superglue. Industrial strength adhesive. They wanted to lock me out of my own inheritance. They wanted to make accessing the building so difficult, so painful, that I would simply give up and hand over the deed just to make the harassment stop. It was a petty, childish move, but it was effective. It forced me to call a locksmith and spend 4 hours drilling out a mechanism that had protected this place for 20 years. But if Darius thought a $20 tube of glue would break me, he had forgotten who raised me, and he certainly forgot what I do for a living. In the Air Force, when a perimeter is breached, we do not retreat, we fortify. I did not call the police. A vandalism report would just give Caleb ammunition to claim the neighborhood was unsafe and the property needed to be sold. Instead, I called a private contractor I knew from my work with defense systems. I told him I needed an upgrade, not a home security package. I needed a fortress. Over the next 48 hours, while my family thought I was crying in my apartment, I was transforming Warehouse 17 into a high-tech trap. We stripped out the old analog locks. In their place, we installed biometric scanners disguised as standard keypads. I added high-definition cameras with night vision and audio recording hidden inside rusted ventilation pipes where no one would look. But the most important addition was invisible. We installed pressure sensors under the concrete floor mats at the loading dock. These sensors were calibrated to detect weight and movement, sending a silent alert directly to my phone the moment someone crossed the threshold without authorization. I treated the warehouse perimeter like a forward operating base in a hostile zone. When the contractor finished, he handed me a tablet linked to the new system. "You are expecting SEAL Team 6 or something, Dom?" he asked, joking. I looked at the live feed on the screen, clear as day. "No," I said. "Just my family." I left the red graffiti on the door for one more day. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to think they had won, that they had successfully intimidated me. Because an enemy who thinks they are winning is an enemy who makes mistakes. And I was ready for them to make the biggest mistake of their lives. A week after I fortified the warehouse, my mother called me in a panic. She was screaming that the family was ruined, that we were going to be out on the street, and that I needed to come home immediately. I drove over expecting a medical emergency. What I found was a staged production of despair that would have been laughable if it were not so dangerous. Caleb was sitting on the living room floor, his head in his hands, surrounded by stacks of paper. His tie was undone, his hair was messy, and he was rocking back and forth. My mother was kneeling beside him, rubbing his back and weeping. It was a scene designed to trigger guilt, but all it triggered in me was suspicion. He looked up when I entered, his eyes red and puffy. "I am sorry, Dom," he choked out. I am so sorry. It is all gone. The crypto exchange collapsed. The hackers took everything. I lost my savings. I lost your mother's retirement fund. I have failed you all. My mother looked at me, her face pale with terror. We are going to lose the house, Dominique. The bank is calling on Monday. We need $200,000 to cover the margin calls, or they take everything. I stood over them, arms crossed. I did not offer a tissue. I offered logic. Show me the police report, I said. If it was a hack, there is a digital trail. Show me the FBI case number. Caleb waved his hand dismissively. The authorities are useless. They take too long. We need a solution now. But I have a plan. I have a friend at the bank who can fast-track a bridge loan to cover us until the insurance pays out. He is willing to cut a check tomorrow morning. He paused, taking a shaky breath, and then delivered the punchline. But he needs collateral. Hard assets. Since this house is already mortgaged, he said the warehouse deed would be perfect. I do not need to sell it, Dom. I swear. I just need to borrow the title for 30 days, just to show the bank we have equity. As soon as the insurance money comes in, I return the title to you. No risk. You save the family and you keep your property. It sounded reasonable to a desperate woman like my mother, but to me it sounded like the oldest con in the book. You sign over the deed as collateral. The loan defaults, the bank seizes the property, and suddenly Caleb buys it back through a shell company for pennies on the dollar. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. You want me to hand over a deed to a property you have never been inside to secure a loan for a hack you cannot prove happened? I asked quietly. I pulled out my phone. Tell you what, I have a friend in the cybercrimes division. Let us call him right now. He can track those hackers in 10 minutes. Caleb stopped rocking. The tears stopped instantly. The sorrow on his face hardened into a mask of pure rage. He stood up abruptly, towering over me. Put the phone away, he snarled, his voice dropping an octave. You think you are so smart, do not you? You think you are better than us because you wear a uniform. Your mother is drowning and you are asking for paperwork. You are a cold, heartless bitch. My mother gasped, but she did not defend me. She looked at Caleb's angry face and then at me, and she chose her side. He is right, Dominique, she whispered. You just want to see us fail. I put my phone back in my pocket. I did not need a cybercrimes expert to know there were no hackers. The only thief in the room was wearing a suit. I walked out, leaving Caleb fuming. He had tried to play the victim and failed. Now he was desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. For me, the Air Force Base was more than just a workplace. It was a sanctuary of order and discipline, a place where rules mattered and merit was rewarded. It was the one place where I was not the black sheep or the stubborn daughter, but Lieutenant Carter, a respected logistics officer. I believed that my chaotic family life could not touch me behind the razor wire fences and armed checkpoints. I was wrong. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of coordinating a supply drop for a unit in Guam when my squadron commander, Colonel Vance, summoned me to his office. His voice over the intercom was not the usual professional tone. It was icy. I walked into his office, executed a sharp salute, and stood at attention. Colonel Vance did not return the salute. He was sitting behind his desk, staring at a notepad, as if it were a piece of rotting meat. Lieutenant, he began, his voice dangerously low. I just got off the phone with a Mrs. Patricia Carter Mills. She claims to be your mother. My blood ran cold. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Yes, sir, I replied, staring straight ahead. That is my mother. The colonel stood up and walked around his desk, leaning against the edge. She was very emotional, Lieutenant. She claims that you have used your military authority to seize family assets. She claims you are withholding funds necessary for her medical care. She even used the phrase elder abuse. She told me that the United States Air Force is harboring a thief who abandons her sick parents. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was a lie so bold, so vicious, that I could barely process it. My mother had not just crossed a boundary, she had launched a nuclear strike on my career. She knew how much this uniform meant to me, and she was using it as leverage. She was willing to get me court-martialed just to force me to sell the warehouse for Caleb. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "Those allegations are completely false. My mother is being manipulated by a third party. I have legal documentation proving ownership of the property in question." Colonel Vance held up a hand to stop me. "I do not want to hear the details, Carter. I am not a family court judge, but I will tell you this. I cannot have an officer in my command with a cloud of financial impropriety hanging over her head. It is a security risk, and it is conduct unbecoming." He leaned in closer, his eyes hard. "Fix this, Lieutenant. Silence this noise. If I receive one more call from your mother or a lawyer or a local congressman about you starving your parents, I will open a formal inquiry, and that will be a permanent mark on your record. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," I whispered. Dismissed. I walked out of his office, my face burning with humiliation. I marched past the junior airmen, past the administrative desks, and out into the cool morning air. I did not cry. The time for tears was over. My mother had made her choice. She had decided that Caleb's approval was worth destroying my livelihood. I sat in my car in the parking lot and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. For months, I had been playing defense. I had been reacting to their moves, trying to be the bigger person. But you cannot be the bigger person when you are fighting a parasite. You have to be the surgeon. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. It was time to stop protecting them. It was time to take off the kid gloves and put on the brass knuckles. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them one they could never win. The escalation I expected arrived 3 days later via certified mail. It was a heavy manila envelope bearing the letterhead of Sterling and Associates, a law firm I recognized from late-night television commercials promising quick settlements for slip-and-fall accidents. Caleb had gone bottom feeding, and he had found a shark. I sat in my car outside the base post office and tore open the seal. As I read the legal jargon, my hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. The letter was a formal notice of intent to contest my father's will, but it was the reasoning that made my stomach turn. The document claimed that Otis Carter was mentally incapacitated at the time of signing his final testament. It alleged that I, Dominique Carter, had used undue influence and emotional manipulation to coerce a senile dying man into disinheriting his wife. It was a grotesque rewriting of history. My father had been sharp as a tack until his final breath. He had known exactly who my mother was, and more importantly, he had known exactly who he wanted to protect. They were dragging my father's memory through the mud just to get their hands on a payout. This was no longer just about property, it was about honor. I did not call my mother. I drove straight to the Legal Assistance Office on base. As an officer, I had access to the Judge Advocate General Corps, or JAG. I met with Captain Miller, a sharp litigator, who had spent 10 years tearing apart fraudulent claims against service members. I slid the letter across his desk without a word. Captain Miller read it, his eyebrows raising slightly as he reached the paragraph demanding an immediate freeze on all assets associated with the warehouse. "This is a shakedown," Dom Miller said, tossing the letter back. "They know they cannot win this in probate court. Proving lack of capacity without medical records is impossible, and your father is. Doctors will testify he was lucid. They are trying to bury you in legal fees and stress until you settle. They are betting that you will pay them 50 grand just to make them go away." I leaned forward. "I do not want to settle, Captain. I want to counter-sue, and I want to destroy their credibility." Miller nodded, pulling out a notepad. "Then we stop playing defense. If this lawyer is willing to file a frivolous suit, it means his client is desperate. Rich men do not hire strip mall lawyers to contest clear wills. We need to find out why Caleb is so desperate for cash right now. Who is he really?" That question sparked the investigation. I went home that night and did what I should have done the day Caleb drove his rental car into our driveway. I stopped looking at him as my stepfather and started looking at him as a target. I pulled his public records. I ran background checks on his so-called investment firm. What I found was silence. No business registration for his crypto company, no property records in his name in the entire state of Illinois. For a man who claimed to be a wealthy investor, Caleb was a ghost. And in my line of work, ghosts usually have something to hide. I decided to dig deeper, and what I was about to find would not just win the lawsuit, it would send him to prison. The call came at 2 a.m, shattering the fragile peace I had found after my meeting with Jag. It was not the police this time, it was my mother. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysteria, piercing through the speaker before I could even say hello. "You need to wire $5,000 to the Cook County clerk right now. Your brother is in jail." I sat up in bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Darius was 30 years old, yet somehow his emergencies always became my emergencies. I asked what happened, keeping my voice flat. "He was just defending himself," my mother screamed. "Some bouncer at a club disrespected him." He was protecting his dignity. I knew exactly what that meant. Darius had likely tried to use Caleb's fake status to get into a VIP section, got rejected, and threw a drunken punch at a man twice his size. And now, they expected me to clean up the mess. "I am not sending the money." "Mom," I said calmly. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by an explosion of rage. "What do you mean you are not sending it? You have the money. You have that government salary. You have savings. He is your brother, Dominique. He cannot stay in a cell with criminals." "He is a criminal if he assaulted someone," I replied. "Let him sit there for the night. Maybe a night in lockup will teach him the discipline you never did." My mother gasped. "You are evil. You are actually evil. Caleb was right about you. You want to see us destroyed. If you do not pay this bail, do not ever call me again. You are dead to me." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. But the attack was not over. 20 minutes later, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Tiffany had taken the fight to the public square. I opened social media to see a picture of me in my dress blues, a photo I had sent to the family group chat with pride years ago. Tiffany had posted it with a caption that made my blood boil. "My heart is breaking tonight," she wrote. "My husband is sitting in a cold cell because of a misunderstanding, and his own sister, a so-called officer of the peace, refuses to help him. She has the money, but she would rather watch her brothers suffer than lift a finger. This is what happens when people forget where they come from. Hashtag fake family. Hashtag heartless." Comments were pouring in from their friends and distant relatives, calling me a traitor, an elitist, and worse. They were spinning a narrative where Darius was the victim and I was the oppressor. It was a calculated attempt to shame me into submission. I put the phone down on the nightstand. I did not reply. I did not defend myself. I let them scream into the digital void. By refusing to bail Darius out, I had finally drawn the line in the sand. My mother had disowned me, and Tiffany had slandered me. They thought this would break me. They thought I would come crawling back with my checkbook to buy their forgiveness. But they underestimated my resolve. If I was dead to them, then I had nothing left to lose. And a soldier with nothing to lose is the most dangerous opponent of all. I knew that blocking them on social media and refusing to pay bail was only a temporary shield. Caleb was drowning in debt, and a drowning man does not stop thrashing just because you look away. He would keep coming for the warehouse until he either got it or destroyed it. So I decided to give him a target. I decided to tell a lie that was so precise, so legally binding, that it would force his hand. I agreed to meet my mother for coffee a week later. It was a neutral ground, a busy Starbucks near the park. She looked tired, her eyes avoiding mine, clearly torn between her husband's demands and her daughter's defiance. Caleb was not there, but I knew he was listening. I could see her phone placed face down on the table, the call timer running. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I want to explain why I cannot sell the warehouse. It is not just about Dad. It is legal. I signed a 10-year lease agreement last month. My mother looked up, confused. A lease? You rented it out? Yes. I lied. Smooth as silk. To a shell corporation I invented named Apex Industrial Solutions. They are a chemical storage company. They paid 5 years up front to store industrial solvents and cleaning agents. The contract is ironclad. If I break the lease, I owe them $3 million in penalties. My hands are tied. I watch the phone on the table. I imagine Caleb on the other end, his face twisting in frustration. He had thought I was just being stubborn. Now he thought I was legally trapped. My mother sighed, clearly relaying the message to her invisible audience. So there is nothing we can do. It is just filled with chemicals for 10 years. I nodded. Exactly. And these are volatile materials. Hazardous, if mishandled. That is why the security is so tight. I left the coffee shop feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. I had planted the seed. A normal person would hear hazardous chemicals, an ironclad lease, and walk away. But Caleb was not normal. He was a con artist who believed the world owed him a living. I knew exactly how his mind would work. He would not see a $3 million penalty. He would see a loophole. In his twisted logic, if the tenant was storing dangerous goods, they were vulnerable. If an accident happened, if the chemicals were proven to be unsafe, or if the facility was damaged, the city would condemn the building. The lease would be voided, the tenant would be evicted, and the warehouse would be free to sell. I had given him the bait. I told him the warehouse was full of dangerous, expensive things that could not be touched. To a man like Caleb, that was not a warning, it was an invitation. He did not know that Apex Industrial Solutions did not exist. He did not know that the only volatile thing inside that building was the trap I had set for him. But he was about to find out, and he was going to bring the whole family down with him. The invitation for a truce arrived 48 hours after I planted the lie about the chemical lease. My mother sent a text message that was surprisingly grammatically correct, which meant Caleb had dictated it. It said, "Please come for dinner tonight. We want to apologize and start over. Family is too important to lose over money." I knew it was a trap. You do not go from disowning your daughter to roasting a chicken for her in 2 days without an agenda. But I accepted. I needed to look them in the eye one last time to confirm my suspicions. I needed to see how desperate they really were. Dinner was a masterclass in tension. The roast beef was dry and the conversation was drier. Caleb was unusually quiet, his leg bouncing under the table. My mother looked like she was walking a tightrope, her eyes darting between us, terrified that one wrong word would detonate the explosive silence. They asked about the weather. They asked about traffic. They did not ask about my life because they did not care. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood up, leaving my purse on the sideboard in the dining room. It was a calculated risk. I walked into the hallway, but I did not go to the bathroom. I stopped just out of sight and looked into the large oval mirror hanging on the opposite wall. It gave me a perfect view of the dining table. The moment I was out of the room, Caleb moved. He did not go for a second helping of potatoes. He lunged for my purse. I watched in the reflection as his manicured fingers frantically unzipped the main compartment. He was not looking for cash or credit cards. He was digging for a heavy iron key. He was looking for the physical access to the warehouse. He did not find it, of course. The key was on a chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt, and the biometric codes were in my head. He zipped the bag shut and sat back down, just as I flushed the toilet to signal my return. When I walked back in, he was smiling, pretending to cut his meat. I sat down, unfolded my napkin, and decided to hand them the shovel they would use to dig their own graves. "It is good we are doing this tonight," I said, looking straight at Caleb, "because I will not be around for a while. I received orders this morning. I am deploying to Germany next week for a classified logistics operation. I will be gone for a month." The effect was instant. Caleb stopped chewing. A look of pure predatory relief washed over his face. He exchanged a quick glance with my mother. They thought they had won the lottery. In their minds, the guard dog was leaving the property and the gate was being left wide open. Germany? Caleb asked, trying to sound casual. That is a long trip, so the warehouse will be unmonitored. Completely, I lied. No staff, just the inventory sitting there. I will be unreachable. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was already planning the break-in. He thought he had a 30-day window to rob me blind. He had no idea he was walking into a surveillance zone that I could monitor from anywhere on the planet. I finished my meal, thanked them for the dry beef, and walked out. It was the last time I would break bread with them. The next time I saw them, they would be in handcuffs. The next morning, I executed the final phase of my deception. I packed 2 large suitcases, making sure to drag them loudly down the stairs so my mother would hear. I wore my travel fatigues, holding a folder of fake deployment papers I had printed the night before. My mother was waiting in the kitchen, offering me a travel mug of coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced a smile. "Safe travels, Dominique," she said, kissing my cheek. "Do not worry about anything here. We will hold down the fort." I looked at her, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of maternal instinct that would warn me to stay. There was nothing, just the eager anticipation of my departure. "Thanks, Mom," I said. "I will see you in a month." I drove to O'Hare International Airport, but I did not board a plane to Frankfurt. Instead, I checked into a hotel near the airport, set up my command center, and waited. I had already arranged for a friend in the unit to post a few pre-scheduled photos of Germany on my social media over the next few days to sell the lie. Once I was settled, I made the most important call of the operation. Mr. Henderson picked up on the first ring. "It is done," I told him. "I am officially gone. They think the warehouse is defenseless." Mr. Henderson sighed, the sound of a man who hated what he was about to do, but understood why it was necessary. "I saw a black truck drive by twice this morning, Dom. Slow. Checking the perimeter. It is them." "I know," I said, watching the live feed on my laptop. "Listen to me carefully, Mr. Henderson. When they come back, and they will come back tonight, do not intervene. Do not turn on the perimeter lights. Do not call the sheriff. Let them cut the chain. Let them break the door." "But what if they damage the structural supports?" he asked worriedly. "They won't get that far," I assured him. "The trap is inside. I just need them to cross the legal threshold. I need them to commit a felony on camera. If you stop them at the gate, it is just trespassing. If they enter the building with tools, it is burglary of a federal contractor facility. There is a big difference in prison time." There was a long pause. "You really want to send your own family to prison, Dom?" I looked at the screen where I could see the reflection of my own tired face. "They are not my family anymore, Mr. Henderson. They are hostiles, and they chose this war. Just stay inside and keep your phone ready." I hung up and sat back in the hotel chair. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city. I knew that somewhere in those shadows, Caleb was gathering his crew, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. He had no idea that he was walking into a cage I had built specifically for him. The waiting was the hardest part, but I knew it wouldn't be long now. The trap was set, the bait was taken, all that was left was the snap. While I was setting up my surveillance station at the hotel, Caleb was running out of time. I learned later, through the discovery phase of the trial, that his desperation had a name, and that name was Rocco. Rocco was a loan shark from the South Side who did not believe in grace periods or payment plans. He believed in breaking legs. Caleb owed him $100,000 money he had borrowed to fund the fake lifestyle he used to seduce my mother. And the deadline was midnight. Caleb knew he could not get the deed from me legally, so he decided to take the money he believed was hidden inside my property by force. He found my brother Darius in the garage playing video games and nursing a beer. Caleb turned off the console and stood in front of the TV, his face slick with sweat. "Listen to me, Darius," Caleb said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "We do not have time to wait for lawyers. Your sister lied to us. There are no chemicals in that warehouse. That lease is a fake." Darius looked up, confused. What are you talking about? Why would she lie? Because she is hiding the cash. Caleb lied, improvising a story that targeted my brother is greed perfectly. Otis did not trust banks. Everyone knows that. He kept his fortune in cash hidden in the walls of that warehouse. There must be at least $500,000 sitting in there. And Dominique is trying to keep it all for herself. She is probably flying to Germany to wait until the coast is clear so she can move it. Darius stood up, his eyes widening. $500,000. That is our money. That is my inheritance. Exactly, Caleb hissed, grabbing Darius by the shoulders. And we are going to go get it tonight. But we have to be smart. We cannot just break in and leave. That leaves evidence. He reached behind a stack of old tires and pulled out 2 red plastic gasoline cans. The smell of petrol filled the small garage. We go in, Caleb whispered. We find the cash. And then we torch the place. Darius took a step back, looking at the gas cans with hesitation. Burn it, Caleb. That is arson. That is serious. It is necessary, Caleb snapped. We blame it on the chemicals she lied about. We say it was an electrical short that ignited the solvents. The whole place goes up. The evidence disappears. The insurance pays out. Dominique gets a check for the building and we walk away with the cash. Nobody gets hurt. It is the perfect crime, Darius. It is justice. Darius looked at the gas cans and then he looked at his empty wallet. He did not see the danger. He did not see the moral abyss he was stepping into. He only saw the easy life Caleb was promising him. He nodded slowly. Okay, Darius said. Let us go get our money. They loaded the gas cans into the trunk of the car. They thought they were masterminds planning a heist. They had no idea they were about to walk into a federal facility with incendiary devices. They were not just thieves anymore. In the eyes of the law, they were about to become domestic terrorists. The Chicago sky opened up that night, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that turned the industrial park into a blurred landscape of gray and black. It was the kind of weather that kept honest people indoors, but it was perfect cover for what my family intended to do. I watched from my hotel room monitor as a battered Ford F-150 rolled slowly down the street. It was a rental, of course. Caleb would never risk damaging a vehicle he actually owned, assuming he owned one at all. The truck pulled up to the loading dock with its headlights off. The driver's side door opened and Caleb stepped out. He was dressed in all black, looking like a bad caricature of a cat burglar, pulling a beanie low over his forehead. Darius stumbled out of the driver's seat, looking less like a criminal mastermind and more like a terrified child. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the empty street, jumping every time thunder rumbled overhead. Then the passenger door opened and Tiffany emerged. She was the anomaly in this scene. While the men were trying to be invisible, she was practically glowing. She was holding a stabilizing gimbal with her smartphone mounted on it, the screen brightness set to maximum. She wasn't there to lift heavy boxes or carry cash. She was there to be the narrator of my destruction. I zoomed in with the camera. I could see her checking her hair in the reflection of the truck window, adjusting her raincoat to make sure it looked flattering. She was treating a federal felony like a content creation opportunity. Leave the phone in the truck, Tiffany, I heard Caleb hiss through the audio feed. We need to move fast. No way, she snapped back, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. I promised my followers a reveal. If we find illegal chemicals or stolen goods in there, I am going live immediately. I am going to expose her, Caleb. I am going to make sure she loses that uniform and her pension. This is my insurance policy. Caleb did not argue. He was too focused on the prize. He signaled to Darius, who dragged the heavy bolt cutters from the truck bed. They moved toward the main gate like a dysfunctional paramilitary unit. I sat back in my chair, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee. It was almost impressive how committed they were to their own downfall. Most criminals try to hide their crimes. My sister-in-law was preparing to broadcast hers to the world in high definition. She thought she was an investigative journalist uncovering a scandal. She had no idea she was about to become the star witness for the prosecution against herself. The wind howled, rattling the hotel window, but on the screen the only sound was the heavy breathing of 3 people about to cross a line they could never uncross. They reached the perimeter fence. Darius lifted the heavy cutters to the chain I had replaced just days ago. The trap was set, the players were in position, and the show was about to begin. The surveillance feed on my laptop was grainy from the downpour, but the image was unmistakable. My brother was wrestling with the hardened steel chain like a man fighting a snake. The rain was coming down in sheets, slicking back his hair and turning the ground beneath him into a mud pit. Caleb stood over him, barking orders that were lost in the wind, but his body language screamed frustration. He kicked the fence, urging Darius to put his back into it. Through my high-quality headphones, the audio was sickeningly clear. I could hear the heavy, labored breathing of my brother as he leveraged his entire body weight against the long red handles of the bolt cutters. I heard the groan of the metal stressing under pressure, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a scream. Then came the sound that signaled the end of my family as I knew it. A sharp, violent crack that echoed like a gunshot across the empty industrial park. The first link gave way. Darius stumbled forward, nearly face-planting into the wet concrete, but he caught himself. He did not look remorseful. He looked energized. He repositioned the jaws of the cutter for the second link, his movements faster now, fueled by the adrenaline of the crime. But the most painful part of this scene was not the theft itself, it was the lookout. I switched camera angles to the camera mounted on the utility pole facing the street. Inside the idling truck, illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights, sat my mother. She was not asleep. She was not crying. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, her posture rigid. Her eyes were darting back and forth between the rearview mirror and the side mirrors, scanning the dark street for police lights. She looked terrified, yes. Her lips were moving, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in a mantra of self-justification. But she was not stopping them. She was not honking the horn to warn me. She was actively guarding the perimeter while her husband and son broke into my property. I zoomed in on her face. I wanted to remember this moment. I needed to burn this image into my mind for the days ahead when she would inevitably claim she was an innocent victim of Caleb's schemes. She was not a victim. She was the getaway driver. Seeing her there, complicit and alert, broke the final thread of guilt I had been holding on to. Another loud snap rang out through the audio feed. The heavy chain rattled to the concrete, coiling like a dead serpent. Darius pulled the padlock free and threw it into the bushes. He grabbed the chain and yanked it off the handles. The gate swung open with a rusty creak, exposing the dark, wet asphalt of the loading bay. The barrier was gone. They had officially crossed the line from a family dispute into a federal crime. Caleb patted Darius on the back, a gesture of congratulations for a job well done. They turned and walked toward the rolling steel door, leaving my mother alone in the truck to watch the rain and wait for a fortune that did not exist. The rolling steel door was heavier than it looked. Darius grunted, his boots slipping on the wet asphalt as he heaved upward, straining against the rusted exterior handle. Caleb stepped in to help, not out of kindness, but out of impatience. Together they forced the metal curtain up. The screech of the rusty tracks echoed through the night, a sound so loud I was sure it would wake the dead. But as the door rose above their heads, the noise stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, steady hum. They expected darkness. They expected the smell of mildew-rotting wood and 20 years of neglect. They expected to turn on their flashlights and sweep away cobwebs to find stacks of old newspapers and broken furniture. Instead, they were blinded. The moment the door cleared, the sensor threshold, the interior woke up. A bank of high-intensity industrial LED lights flickered to life, flooding the bay with a brilliance that rivaled an operating room. The sudden transition from the pitch-black rainy night to this clinical white brightness made them recoil. Darius actually shielded his eyes, stumbling back a step. I watched their faces on my monitor. The shock was total. They were staring into a space that looked less like a warehouse and more like a high-tech laboratory. The floor was not cracked concrete. It was sealed with pristine gray epoxy that gleamed under the lights. The walls were insulated and paneled. The air blowing out of the open door was not stale. It was crisp, cool, and filtered, maintained at a precise 68 degrees by the climate control system I had installed 3 years ago. Caleb lowered his hand, his mouth hanging open. "Holy hell," he whispered, his voice caught by the sensitive microphones. "Look at this place." But it was what filled the space that truly froze them. Stretching back into the depth of the building were 2 rows of massive shipping containers and reinforced crates. They were organized with military precision, each one sitting on a raised pallet labeled with barcodes and tracking chips. Darius walked forward, mesmerized, drawn in like a moth to a flame. He approached the nearest crate, a matte black polymer box the size of a small car. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the side, his fingers tracing the white stenciled letters painted on the surface. "Lockheed Martin." Darius read aloud, his voice shaking. He moved to the next one. "This one says Raytheon. And this one." He stopped at a gray metal container stamped with a distinct circular emblem: the eagle, the shield, the stars. "United States Air Force," Caleb finished for him, walking up behind him. They stood there in the center of the room, dripping wet rainwater onto my spotless floor, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of aerospace logistics equipment. A rational person would have seen those government logos and run for their life. A rational person would have realized they had just broken into a federal supply chain hub. But Caleb and Darius were not rational. They were greedy. And in that moment, they did not see danger. They saw dollar signs. They thought they had stumbled upon a black market fortune, not realizing they were standing inside their own prison cell. I watched Tiffany strut past the frozen figures of her husband and father-in-law. To a trained eye, the logos on those crates represented national security and strict chain of custody protocols. To Tiffany, they represented a lottery ticket wrapped in a scandal. She did not see federal property. She saw leverage. She shoved her phone camera right up to the stencil that read, "United States Air Force property. Do not remove." She turned to Darius, her face flushed with the excitement of a woman who thought she had just solved a mystery. "Do you see this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the metal walls. I knew it. I knew she was not making that money legally. Nobody makes that kind of money pushing paper for the government. She is stealing from the military. She is running a black market weapons ring out of Dad's old shed. Caleb hesitated, looking at the ominous warning labels with a flicker of unease. He was a con artist, and he knew enough about the law to know that messing with the government was dangerous. But Tiffany was a force of nature fueled by ignorance and greed. She was already miles ahead in her delusion. "This is perfect," she announced, pacing back and forth in her wet heels, leaving muddy footprints on the pristine epoxy floor. "We do not need to burn the place down, Caleb. We do not need to hide anything. We are the heroes here. We discovered a crime ring." She looked into the camera lens, addressing her imaginary audience with the confidence of a primetime news anchor. "You guys are witnessing history. We just busted a major smuggling operation. My sister-in-law is going to prison for the rest of her life. She has been acting so high and mighty, judging us for trying to survive while she is literally sitting on a pile of stolen missiles." I sat back in my hotel chair and shook my head in disbelief. It was a level of stupidity that was almost impressive. She genuinely believed that because my name was on the deed, I was personally hoarding munitions like they were collector items. She did not understand the concept of a defense contractor. She did not understand that I was paid to house and transport these items legally. "Call the police, Darius," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "Call them right now. Tell them we found a stash of stolen military hardware. When they arrest her, the state will seize the assets. And since we are the whistleblowers and the next of kin, we can petition for the property rights. We are going to be rich, and we are going to be famous." Darius looked at Caleb and then at Tiffany. The promise of being a hero instead of an arsonist was too tempting. He reached for his phone. She was writing a legal fantasy in her head, completely unaware of the reality she was standing in. By recording herself inside the building and threatening to call the authorities, she was not building a case against me. She was providing a video confession to breaking and entering into a secure federal facility. She thought she was calling the police to arrest me. She had no idea she was about to call in the airstrike on herself. While Tiffany was busy auditioning for her own reality show in the middle of the aisle, Caleb was driven by a much darker purpose. The clock was ticking on his debt to Rocco, and he knew that a loan shark would not accept a stolen missile guidance system as payment. He needed cash, and in his twisted mind, he was convinced that my father had hollowed out these military crates to store bundles of tax-free currency. Caleb grabbed a pry bar from his tool bag and attacked the nearest wooden crate. The stencil on the side was clear. It read, "Sensitive material. Handle with care. Do not drop." Caleb read it, sneered, and jammed the steel bar under the lid. "It is a decoy." He grunted, the veins in his neck bulging as he leveraged his weight against the wood. "Dominique is smart. She would not leave the money out in the open. She hid it inside these fake machine parts to fool the taxman." With a loud crack, the lid splintered open. Caleb frantically tossed aside layers of anti-static foam and protective bubble wrap. He dug his hands in, expecting to feel the texture of paper money. Instead, he pulled out a complex metallic cylinder wrapped in heavy plastic. It was a hydraulic actuator for a fighter jet landing gear, worth about $40,000. Caleb looked at it with disgust and threw it onto the concrete floor. The precise machinery shattered on impact, sending springs and gears skittering across the epoxy. "It is not here," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Check the other ones. Dig deeper." Darius hesitated. He was holding a crowbar, staring at a crate marked high voltage. "Internal batteries. Do not puncture." "Caleb, I do not know about this," Darius stammered. "These look real. What if we break something dangerous?" "Break it all!" Caleb roared, turning on him with wild eyes. "It is just scrap metal, Darius. It is all a lie. The gold is at the bottom. Start digging, or you do not get a dime." Bullied by his stepfather and blinded by greed, Darius swung his crowbar. He smashed the lock on the crate. He ripped open the side panel. He began pulling out trays of microchips and fiber optic cables, tossing them over his shoulder like garbage. I sat in my hotel room, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. Every time they threw a component on the floor, they were adding another felony charge to their rap sheet. They were destroying federal property in a frantic search for a treasure that did not exist. They were wading through millions of dollars of technology, treating it like trash, convinced that the real value was a stack of dirty $20 bills. It was the ultimate irony. They were literally throwing away a fortune to find pocket change, and they were too stupid to stop. While Caleb was busy destroying $40,000 worth of hydraulics, Darius had wandered deeper into the aisles. He was looking for something that screamed safe deposit box. He found it pushed against the back wall, hidden behind a pallet of tires. It wasn't a wooden crate like the others. It was a reinforced aluminum transport case, sleek silver and rivetless. It looked like something you would see in a spy movie, handcuffed to a wrist. There were no easy latches on this one. The top was secured with 4 heavy-duty butterfly clasps and a digital keypad that was currently blinking a steady red light. On the lid, a large yellow sticker read, "Pressurized container. Inert gas seal. Do not open. Not. Warranty void if seal is broken." Darius didn't read the warning. He only saw the heavy construction and the digital lock. In his simple, desperate mind, heavy security meant heavy cash. He waved his flashlight frantically. "Caleb, over here? I found the big one." Caleb scrambled over the debris of the crates they had already smashed. When he saw the silver case, his face twisted into a greedy grin. "That is it," he breathed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That is the stash. Your father was a paranoid old man. He wouldn't keep the money in wood. He would keep it in steel. Crack it open." Darius positioned the crowbar. There was no gap to insert the tool, so he had to make one. He slammed the heavy steel bar down onto the corner of the aluminum case, denting the precision-machined metal. He hit it again and again, grunting with effort, until he created enough of a lip to wedge the pry bar in. He jammed the rusted tip of the crowbar into the hairline seam of the lid. Metal screeched against metal. Caleb ran over, grabbing Darius by the shoulder. "Leverage it. Put your back into it." Darius heaved with all his strength. The aluminum groaned. The butterfly clasps began to warp. Then it happened. As the lock gave way, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the noise of the rain. Hiss. It sounded like a tire blowing out, or a pressurized airlock releasing. It was a long, violent exhalation of gas. Darius jumped back, dropping the crowbar. "What was that?" he yelled. "Is it a bomb?" Caleb flinched, but his greed pulled him back in. "It is just air, open it." Darius reached out with a trembling hand and threw the lid back. They both leaned in, expecting to see stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. Instead, they were staring at something that looked like the inside of a satellite. It was a dense cluster of gold-plated circuits, optical lenses, and titanium gyroscopes, all suspended in shock-absorbing foam. It was beautiful, terrifyingly complex, and completely foreign to them. The nitrogen gas that had been preserving the delicate electronics had escaped, and now the humid, rainy air of Chicago was rushing in to corrode the exposed sensors. "What is this?" Darius asked, his voice trembling. "Where is the money?" I watched from my hotel room, shaking my head. They had just breached the containment vessel for a drone navigation module. That single hiss of escaping gas just cost the insurance company $200,000. And they were still looking for paper. The hissing of the nitrogen gas should have been a warning to freeze, but panic makes people do stupid things. Tiffany, realizing that her big reveal on social media was turning into a confusing mess of wires and metal, lost her temper. She stormed over to where Darius and Caleb were staring at the exposed drone component, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. "Move out of the way!" she shrieked, shoving her phone into her pocket. "You two are useless. It is right there. The money is probably underneath this junk. Stop staring at it and dump it out." Darius tried to block her. "Tiffany, wait," he stammered, holding the heavy aluminum case with both hands. "This looks expensive. We should not break it." "I do not care if it is expensive," she yelled. "It is not ours." She lunged forward, grabbing the side of the case. For a brief second, there was a struggle. My brother, weakened by fear, and my sister-in-law, fueled by greed, played a tug-of-war with a prototype navigation gyroscope that belonged to the United States government. And then gravity took over. Tiffany shoved Darius hard in the chest. His grip slipped. The heavy case tumbled from his hands. Time seemed to slow down on my monitor. I watched the silver box rotate in the air. When it hit the epoxy floor, it did not just bang, it crunched. The sound was sickening, like a bone breaking, as the delicate internal glass optics and gold filaments shattered upon impact. That single crash was the sound of a $1.2 million loss. But the warehouse did not mourn the loss. It reacted to it. The impact triggered the seismic sensors I had installed in the floor. Instantly, the sterile white lights cut out. The room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat before the emergency system kicked in. Strobing red hazard lights began to pulse, washing the room in a terrifying crimson glow. A deafening siren designed to disorient intruders began to wail, bouncing off the metal walls at 120 decibels. "Intruder alert," a robotic voice announced over the PA system. "Lockdown initiated. Federal authorities have been notified." On the screen, I saw them scramble. Caleb dropped his flashlight. Tiffany clamped her hands over her ears, screaming something that was lost under the noise of the siren. Darius turned and ran toward the open loading dock door, the only way out. He was too late. The heavy steel rolling door was already moving. It slammed down with hydraulic force, sealing shut with a mechanical thud that shook the floor. The magnetic locks engaged with a loud clank. They ran to the service door, locked. They ran to the fire exit, mag-locked. The ventilation shut down to prevent gas escape. They were sealed inside a red, screaming box. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a cold sense of justice. They wanted to get into the warehouse so badly. Now they were never going to leave, at least not until the people with the handcuffs arrived to escort them out. The wailing siren inside the warehouse was deafening, a sonic weapon designed to disorient enemy combatants. On my screen, I watched my family crumble under the pressure. Tiffany was curled up in a ball on the floor, covering her ears and screaming. Darius was slamming his shoulder against the steel rolling door, futilely trying to force it open. Caleb was running in circles, looking for a keypad, a switch, anything to make the noise stop. I decided to show them a small mercy just so they could hear the gravity of their situation. I pressed a command on my laptop and the siren cut out instantly. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise. The only sound left was their ragged breathing and the hum of the cooling units. Then I leaned into my microphone. My voice was projected through the warehouse PA system, amplified and echoing off the metal walls like the voice of judgment itself. "I hope you are all comfortable," I said, my voice calm and icy, "because you are going to be there for a while." Caleb froze. He looked up at the ceiling, searching for the source of the voice. "Dominique," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Dominique, open this door. This isn't funny. We are your family." "You stopped being my family the moment you cut that chain, Caleb," I replied. I zoomed the camera in on Tiffany, who was staring up at the speakers with mascara running down her face. "And Tiffany," I continued, "I saw what you did. I have it all on tape. You might want to call a very expensive lawyer. That silver case you just smashed contained a laser gyroscope assembly for a C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft." I paused to let the words sink in. "Do you know how much that costs? It is not $1,000. It is not $10,000. That single unit is valued at $1.2 million. And since you entered a federal storage facility to destroy it, that makes it a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence. Congratulations! You just bought a one-way ticket to federal prison." Tiffany let out a strangled sob. "No. It was an accident. I didn't know." "Ignorance is not a defense," I said. Darius ran to the service door and started kicking it. "Let us out, Dom. Please, we will pay for it. We will fix it. Just open the door." "I cannot do that, Darius," I said. "The system is automated. Once the seismic sensors were tripped, the facility went into level 4 lockdown. The magnetic locks on those doors are rated to withstand a truck bomb. You cannot kick them down, and I cannot open them remotely. The only people who can open those doors now are the military police." Caleb's face went pale. "The military police," I checked the time on my screen. "Yes." The silent alarm went straight to the nearest base. "They are about 10 minutes away. And Caleb, they do not carry tasers, they carry assault rifles. So I suggest you sit down, put your hands where they can see them, and pray they are in a good mood. Because right now, you are not intruders. You are domestic terrorists trapped in a secure box." I cut the microphone feed. On the screen, I watched Caleb slide down the wall until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. He knew it was over. The trap had snapped shut, and I had the front row seat to their destruction. The silence inside the warehouse did not last long. Through the external cameras, I saw the night sky light up, not with lightning, but with the strobe lights of a full-scale federal raid. It was a beautiful sight. When I told Caleb that the authorities were coming, he likely imagined a patrol car with 2 bored officers writing a ticket for trespassing. He was not expecting the cavalry. 3 black tactical SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the loading dock, flanking a heavy armored personnel carrier stamped with the Department of Homeland Security insignia. Men in full tactical gear poured out of the vehicles. They were not carrying notepads. They were carrying M4 carbines and ballistic shields. This was the response protocol for a breach of a facility housing sensitive aerospace technology, and it was executed with terrifying precision. I watched the color drain from Caleb's face as the heavy rolling door began to rise again. This time, it was not being opened by 2 greedy thieves. It was being overridden by a federal master key. As the metal curtain ascended, it revealed a wall of blinding floodlights and laser sights pointed directly at my family's chests. Federal agents, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Drop any weapons and get on the ground, hands where we can see them. Now! Tiffany screamed and threw herself flat on the epoxy floor, covering her head with her hands. Darius, shaking uncontrollably, dropped to his knees and raised his hands in surrender, sobbing loudly. But Caleb, arrogant to the bitter end, made the mistake of thinking he could negotiate with a tactical team. He did not get on the ground. Instead, he took a step forward, raising a hand as if he were hailing a waiter at a restaurant. He squinted into the blinding lights, trying to flash his charming smile. "Officers, wait," he yelled, trying to project authority. "Do not shoot. This is a big misunderstanding. I am the owner is father. I am Dominique. Carter is father. We are just checking on the property." It was the last lie he would tell as a free man. The lead officer did not ask for ID. He did not ask for a character reference. He signaled his team. Two agents surged forward with the speed of a linebacker. One of them slammed a ballistic shield into Caleb, his chest knocking the wind out of him and sending him flying backward. Before he even hit the ground, the second agent was on top of him. I watched with grim satisfaction as my stepfather, the man who thought he was untouchable, was pressed face first into the hard concrete. An agent drove a knee into his back, grabbing his expensive suit jacket and wrenching his arms behind him. Caleb yelped in pain, spitting blood from a bitten lip. "You are assaulting a citizen," Caleb gargled against the floor. "I will sue you." "Shut up," the agent barked, tightening the zip ties around Caleb's wrists until the plastic bit into the skin. "You are under arrest for domestic terrorism and theft of government property. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." They hauled him to his feet, dragging him toward the armored truck like a sack of garbage. He looked back at the warehouse, wild-eyed and broken. He finally realized that this wasn't a family dispute. He had stepped into a world of consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. Inside the warehouse, the scene had devolved into absolute chaos. With Caleb subdued and handcuffed, the tactical team turned their attention to the accomplices. Tiffany was still on the floor, but she was not praying for forgiveness. She was fighting for her life, which to her meant fighting for her smartphone. When a female agent reached down to secure the device as evidence, Tiffany shrieked like a banshee. "You cannot take that. That is my personal property. My cloud accounts are linked to that." The agent did not argue. She simply snatched the phone from Tiffany's grip and dropped it into an evidence bag. Tiffany lunged forward, grabbing the agent's boot. "Giving me back my phone. I have rights. I need to delete the video." The agent kicked her leg free and pinned Tiffany against the epoxy floor. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and trespassing on federal property," the agent stated calmly. "And anything on that phone is now property of the United States government." Tiffany collapsed into a heap of sobbing, hysterical mess, her mascara smearing across her face as the zip ties were cinched tight around her wrists. She wasn't crying because she was going to jail. She was crying because she realized the video she just recorded was going to be the primary evidence used to convict her. A few feet away, my brother Darius had completely disintegrated. The tough guy act was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a terrified boy looking for a scapegoat. As they pulled him to his feet, he started screaming, pointing his chin toward Caleb. "It was him. It was all him." Darius wailed, snot running down his face. "I didn't want to come here. He forced me. He told me it was abandoned. I am innocent. Look at me. I am just a victim here." Caleb, who was being dragged toward the door, spat blood on the floor and glared at Darius. "Shut up, you coward," he hissed. But the most painful part of the night was yet to come. I switched my monitor view back to the external camera. The rain was still pouring down on the dark street where my mother sat in the truck. She had locked the doors, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She thought that if she stayed inside the vehicle, she was invisible. She thought the metal and glass would protect her from the consequences of her choices. She was wrong. Two agents approached the truck, weapons drawn but lowered. "Exit the vehicle," one of them shouted, tapping on the glass with the barrel of his rifle. "Step out with your hands up." My mother didn't move. She just shook her head, muttering something I couldn't hear. The agent didn't ask twice. He used a window breaker tool to shatter the driver's side glass. My mother screamed as the safety glass rained down on her lap. The door was wrenched open and she was pulled out into the cold rain. "I am his mother," she yelled, struggling as they spun her around. "I didn't go inside. I was just waiting. I didn't do anything." "You were the lookout for a felony in progress, ma'am," the agent said, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. "That makes you an accessory." I watched as they marched her toward the flashing lights of the cruiser. Her hair was wet, her clothes were soaked, and her dignity was gone. She looked small and frail, flanked by heavily armed men. For a second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the phone call where she told the colonel I was abusing her. I remembered how she watched them cut the lock. She had driven the getaway car. Now she was going to take the ride. Federal interrogation rooms are designed to strip away hope. There are no windows, the air is stale, and the furniture is bolted to the floor. It is a vacuum where lies go to die. I was not allowed to be present during the questioning, as I was technically the victim and a witness, but I was later given access to the transcripts and case files. Reading them was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. The FBI separated them immediately, placing them in 4 identical gray rooms. This is standard procedure to prevent them from getting their stories straight. But they did not need to coordinate a lie, because the truth was already uploaded to the cloud. Tiffany was the first to break. She sat at the metal table, her makeup streaked, still wearing her rain-soaked dress. She tried to play the role of the confused influencer. She told the agents that it was all a prank, a social media skit that had gone wrong. She claimed she didn't know they were actually breaking the law. The agent sitting across from her didn't say a word. He simply placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. Tiffany's own voice filled the small room, shrill and excited. "Look at this, guys. We are busting a smuggling ring. We are going to take this place over." The agent paused the video on a frame of Tiffany, zooming in on the Air Force warning label. "Ma'am," the agent said dryly, "you are on record acknowledging that the property belonged to the military. You then filmed yourself encouraging your accomplices to destroy it. This is not a skit. It is a digital confession with 4,000 views." Tiffany stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing. She realized that her obsession with fame had just handed the prosecution a slam-dunk case. She slumped in her chair and asked for a lawyer. In the next room, Darius was trying to sell out his stepfather. He was sweating profusely, his leg bouncing nervously. "It wasn't my idea," he pleaded. "Caleb made me do it. He owes money to bad people. I was just there to carry the boxes. I didn't break anything." The agent swiped a finger across his tablet and turned it toward Darius. The screen showed the high-definition footage from Tiffany Represents live stream. It showed Darius swinging the crowbar. It showed him smashing the sensor array. It captured the sound of the glass shattering and the gas hissing. "The video shows you personally destroying a classified navigation component," the agent noted. "Your stepfather might have planned it, but your hands held the weapon." Darius put his head on the table and began to weep. Then there was Caleb. He was the hardest to crack. He sat with his arms crossed, his jaw set, maintaining his arrogance even in handcuffs. He insisted that he was a concerned parent conducting a welfare check. He claimed he smelled gas and broke in to save the neighborhood. It was a decent lie, one that might have worked, if not for his daughter-in-law. The agent played the final clip. It was the audio from inside the truck before they got out. Caleb Represents' voice was clear as a bell. "We find the cash, and then we torch the place. We blame it on the chemicals." The color drained from Caleb Represents' face. That single sentence elevated his charges from burglary to conspiracy to commit arson and insurance fraud. The agent turned off the tablet. "We have the gas cans from your trunk, Mr. Mills. And we have your voice planning the fire. You are looking at 20 years minimum." Caleb looked at the blank screen of the tablet. He realized that the technology he despised, the social media he mocked, and the stepdaughter he underestimated had combined to form a perfect, inescapable cage. The room went silent save for the hum of the ventilation as the reality of his future settled in. The metal door to the interrogation room did not open quickly. It swung open with a heavy, rhythmic thud that signaled authority. Caleb looked up from the table, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion. He was expecting his court-appointed lawyer, or perhaps another agent coming to offer him a plea deal. He was not expecting the person who walked through the frame. I stepped into the room. I was no longer wearing the travel fatigues or the civilian clothes they were used to seeing me in. I was dressed in my full-service dress blue uniform. My jacket was tailored perfectly, the silver braid on my sleeves catching the harsh fluorescent light. On my chest sat 3 rows of ribbons representing deployments, commendations, and years of service that my family never cared to ask about. I carried my service cap under my arm. I did not look like a daughter. I looked like an officer of the United States Air Force. I signaled the guard to leave us. The door clicked shut, sealing us in. I walked over to the chair opposite Caleb and sat down, placing my cap on the table between us. I did not say a word. I just looked at him. Caleb stared at me, blinking as if he were trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the narrative he had built in his head. To him, I was just Dominique, the stubborn girl who worked in a dusty warehouse. He scoffed a nervous, jagged sound. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered, rattling his handcuffs against the table. "What is this, Dom? Did you dress up for Halloween? Tell these gorillas to let me go. Tell them it is a family dispute." I remained silent, my expression unreadable. "Stop looking at me like that," he snapped, his voice rising. "You are enjoying this, are not you? You set us up. You lured us there. But you cannot keep me here. I know what you are. You are just a glorified warehouse keeper. You stack boxes for a living. You are a nobody." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the metal table. The air in the room shifted. "That is where you are wrong, Caleb," I said softly. "And that mistake is going to cost you the rest of your life." He frowned, confusion clouding his arrogance. "You think I just rent space?" I asked. "You think I just manage inventory? That warehouse is not a storage unit. It is a classified transit node." I pointed to the ribbons on my chest. "I am not just a logistics officer. I am a Tier 1 defense contractor with top-secret clearance. My company, the one Dad started and I expanded, is the primary civilian link for the Department of Defense in the Midwest. We handle guidance systems, avionics, and prototype weaponry that cannot be shipped through commercial channels." Caleb's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "When you cut that lock," I continued, my voice hardening, "you did not break into a private business. You breached a facility operating under the protection of the Pentagon. That equipment you destroyed wasn't insured by Geico, Caleb. It was property of the United States government." Caleb slumped back in his chair, the blood draining from his face. He looked at my uniform, really looked at it for the first time, and he realized he had been fighting a war against a general while thinking he was bullying a child. "You are not a victim of a family feud," I said, standing up and picking up my cap. "You are an enemy combatant who attacked a military supply line, and you are going to be treated like one." I turned to leave. Caleb lunged forward as far as the chains would allow. "Dom, wait. We can fix this. I am your father." I did not look back. I knocked on the door for the guard. "You are nothing to me," I said as the door opened. "Just an inmate with a number." I walked out into the hallway, leaving him alone with the silence and the crushing weight of the truth. He had gambled everything on me being weak. He found out too late that I was the strongest thing he had ever met. I left Caleb alone in his cell, drowning in the realization of his new reality, and walked down the sterile hallway to the next interrogation room. This was the door I had been dreading. Confronting a criminal is part of the job. Confronting the mother who raised you only to realize she has become a stranger is a torture no training manual prepares you for. I signaled the guard to open the door. My mother was sitting at the table, her hands cuffed to the steel bar in the center. She looked small, frail, and utterly defeated. Her hair was a mess from the rain, and her eyes were swollen. When she saw me enter in my full dress uniform, she did not look proud. She looked betrayed. "You," she spat out, her voice trembling with misplaced anger. "How could you do this to us? How could you call the police on your own family? Caleb is a good man. He was trying to save us from your greed." I did not sit down. I stood over her, feeling a cold detachment that scared me more than her anger. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick file folder. It landed on the metal table with a heavy slap that made her jump. "He is not a good man, Mom," I said quietly. "And his name is not Caleb." She stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. "What are you talking about?" "Of course his name is Caleb. He is an investor. He is wealthy." I flipped the folder open. Attached to the front page was a series of mugshots. They showed the same man, but in each one he looked slightly different. A mustache in one, dyed hair in another. But the eyes were the same. The cold, predatory eyes of a wolf in sheep's clothing. "His name is Robert Vance." I read from the report, keeping my tone clinical. "He is a career confidence man currently wanted in Florida, Ohio, and Texas." My mother shook her head violently, squeezing her eyes shut. "No, that is a lie. That is not him." "It is him," I continued, relentless. "He targets recently widowed women with assets. He charms them, moves in quickly, isolates them from their families, and then drains their accounts. He does not have a crypto business. He does not have a bridge loan connection. He has a gambling addiction and $100,000 in debt to a loan shark named Rocco." I pointed to the financial records in the file. "Look at the dates, Mom. He did not spend his money on your arthritis treatment. He spent your retirement fund on online blackjack and luxury car rentals to keep up the charade. He was not trying to help you get a house. He was trying to get his hands on the warehouse deed so he could leverage it to pay off his hitman." My mother looked down at the papers. She saw the aliases. She saw the police reports detailing the women he had left destitute before coming to Illinois. She saw the undeniable truth printed in black and white. The man she had defended, the man she had chosen over her own daughter, was a phantom. A sound escaped her throat, a low guttural wail of pure anguish. It wasn't just the loss of money, it was the humiliation. She realized that every kind word, every romantic gesture, every promise of a better life had been a calculated lie designed to empty her purse. She had thrown away her husband's legacy and her daughter's love for a criminal who saw her as nothing more than an ATM. I watched her crumble. She put her head on the table, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook the handcuffs. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to comfort her. But I couldn't. She had made her choice when she sat in that truck and watched them cut the lock. I closed the folder and turned away. The truth had set her free from his lies, but it had imprisoned her in a cage of her own making. The morning after the raid, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the cold gray reality of the federal justice system. My family was moved from the holding cells to a conference room at the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse. They were not sitting together as a united front anymore. They were separated by guards handcuffed to the table, looking like ghosts of the people they used to be. I stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, watching as their court-appointed federal defender Mr. Clark walked in. He did not carry a briefcase full of hope. He carried a single thin file that contained the end of their lives. He tossed it onto the table and looked at them with the exhausted expression of a man who knew there was no winning this battle. "You need to understand the gravity of your situation." Mr. Clark began, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy. "This is not a state matter. You are not going to get community service and probation. We are in federal territory now, and the statutes you violated are severe." He pointed to a document in the file. "You have been charged under Title 18 of the United States Code, specifically Section 1361 willful depredation against property of the United States and Section 2155 destruction of national defense materials. Tiffany shifted in her seat, the chains rattling. But we didn't mean to destroy defense materials, she whimpered. We just wanted the money. It was an accident. Intent does not matter when the damage is this catastrophic. Clark cut her off sharply. You filmed yourself breaking in. You filmed the destruction. The prosecutor has the video. The jury will see you laughing as you broke into a facility housing critical aerospace components. He turned a page. Let us talk about restitution. The item you destroyed, the laser gyroscope assembly, has a replacement cost of $1.2 million. Added to the damage to the facility doors, the security systems, and the cost of the hazardous material cleanup team for the nitrogen leak, the total restitution demanded by the Department of Justice is $1.5 million. Darius gasped, his face turning an ashy gray. 1.5 million. We do not have that kind of money. We are bankrupt. Then the government will garnish every penny you earn for the rest of your lives, Clark said simply. But the money is the least of your problems. The sentencing guidelines for crimes of this magnitude involving national security assets are mandatory. There is no parole in the federal system. You serve 85% of your time. He looked at Caleb, then at Darius, and finally at Tiffany. Based on the evidence, the prosecutor is seeking a sentence of 10 to 15 years for each of you. The room went deathly silent. 10 to 15 years. My mother let out a low moan, putting her head on the table. Tiffany looked like she had been slapped. The life she knew, the brunches, the shopping trips, the social media following was gone. It was replaced by a concrete cell and a prison uniform. And what about me? My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stayed in the car. You were the getaway driver for a federal felony, Mrs. Mills Clark replied, not softening the blow. That makes you an accessory before and after the fact. The prosecutor might offer you a deal if you testify against Robert, or Caleb as you call him, but you are still looking at minimum prison time. Likely 3 to 5 years. I watched them digest this. They had come to the warehouse looking for easy money. They thought they were entitled to my father represents legacy. Instead, they had purchased a debt they could never pay and a sentence that would steal the best years of their lives. The greed that had driven them had finally driven them off a cliff. And there was no one left to save them. I was granted one final visitation with my mother before the arraignment. We sat on opposite sides of a thick plexiglass barrier in the county detention center. The woman who looked back at me was unrecognizable. The polished, critical matriarch who had presided over family dinners with an iron fist was gone. In her place sat a trembling, gray-haired woman in an oversized orange jumpsuit, stripping away every ounce of her dignity. She picked up the receiver with shaking hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with a desperation that was painful to watch. Dominique, she choked out, her voice tinny through the phone line. You have to stop this, please. You have to tell them to let us go. I sat stoically, my hands folded on the metal ledge. I did not pick up the phone immediately. I just watched her unravel. I am an old woman, she sobbed, leaning her forehead against the glass. I cannot survive in prison. My arthritis, my heart, it will kill me. And Darius, he is just a boy. He made a mistake. We were all tricked by him. Robert, Caleb, whatever his name is. He brainwashed us. You know I would never hurt you. She looked up, her eyes pleading. Just tell the judge you made a mistake. Tell them you gave us permission to be there. Tell them you want to drop the charges. If you withdraw the complaint, this all goes away. We can be a family again. We can start over. I finally lifted the receiver to my ear. I took a breath, steeling myself against the maternal guilt she was trying to weaponize one last time. Mom, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice steady and low. You are not listening to the lawyer. You think this is a dispute between you and me. You think this is like when Darius wrecked the car and we paid the neighbor to keep the police out of it? I leaned closer to the glass. This is not a civil suit. I am not the plaintiff. I am just a witness. The plaintiff is the United States of America. Her face went slack. What, you broke into the Department of Defense contract facility, I explained, breaking it down like I would for a fresh recruit. You destroyed classified hardware. The moment that alarm tripped, the investigation was taken out of my hands. The FBI and the Pentagon are pressing these charges. Not me. I cannot just call the judge and say, never mind, I continued. If I went in there and lied, if I said I gave you permission to destroy a $1 million guidance system, I would be court-martialed. I would be charged with conspiracy and perjury. I would lose my commission, my pension, and my freedom. You are asking me to go to prison with you. She stared at me, the blood draining from her face, as the reality of the machinery she had caught herself in finally hit home. But you are my daughter, she whispered. You are supposed to save us. I stood up, signaling to the guard that the visit was over. You made your choice when you sat in that truck and watched them cut the lock, I said. You chose a con man over your own blood because he promised you a house. Now the government is going to give you a house. It just has bars on the windows. I hung up the phone. She started screaming, slamming her palms against the glass, begging, pleading, crying out my name. I turned my back and walked toward the heavy steel door. I did not look back. I could not save her from the consequences of her own greed, and for the first time in my life, I stopped trying. The conference room at the detention center smelled of stale coffee and absolute desperation. Mr. Clark, the public defender, laid a document on the metal table that looked innocent enough, but it was essentially a death warrant for the life Tiffany and Darius had built. It was an asset forfeiture agreement. The federal prosecutor is willing to recommend the lower end of the sentencing guidelines, Clark explained, clicking his pen nervously. But only if you make a significant good faith payment toward the restitution immediately. They want liquid assets. Now. Darius looked at the paper, his eyes hollow. What does that mean? He whispered. It means everything goes, Clark said ruthlessly. The savings account for the house, the stocks, the lease on the Audi, the jewelry, the designer clothes. If it has value, the government takes it to pay for the gyroscope you smashed. You are going to be left with zero. Tiffany let out a high-pitched gasp. You cannot take my car. That is my car. And my engagement ring. That is personal property. It is proceeds of a lifestyle you can no longer afford, Clark snapped. You sign this, or you go to trial and likely get the full 15 years. It is your choice, poverty or prison. Darius did not hesitate. He was a creature of comfort, and the thought of 15 years in a federal penitentiary terrified him more than being poor. He grabbed the pen with trembling hands. I will sign, he stammered. Take it all. Just get me a lighter sentence, please. He scribbled his signature, effectively signing away their past, present, and future. He pushed the paper toward Tiffany. Tiff, sign it. We have to do this. Tiffany stared at the document, and then she looked at Darius. For years she had looked at him and seen a meal ticket, a stepping stone to the suburban royalty she craved. Now she looked at him and saw a man who had dragged her into a felony, humiliated her on a global scale, and was now asking her to become destitute. The illusion of love, which was barely there to begin with, evaporated instantly. She did not pick up the pen. Instead, she stood up, the chains of her handcuffs rattling violently against the table. No, she screamed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. I am not signing anything with him. Darius recoiled. Tiffany, what are you doing? I want a divorce, she shrieked, turning to the stunned lawyer. Did you hear me? I want a divorce immediately. I am not going down with this loser. He promised me a house. He promised me a life, and look where I am. I am in a jumpsuit smelling like bleach because he is too stupid to know the difference between a warehouse and a military base. She turned on Darius, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You are nothing, you are broke, you are going to jail, and you are useless to me. I want my name off his accounts. I want to be tried separately. Get him away from me." The guards had to step in as she lunged across the table, trying to claw at Darius, Represent's face with her manicured nails. Darius just sat there, shrinking into his chair, weeping silently. He had lost his freedom, his money, and now the wife he had tried so hard to impress was trying to assault him in police custody. They were stripped of everything: the cars, the clothes, the house, and the marriage. All of it was gone. They were leaving that room with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a federal inmate number. 6 months later, the gavel had officially fallen, and the silence that followed was deafening. The chaos of the raid and the drama of the courtroom were replaced by the grinding reality of consequences. Justice, I learned, is not always a swift strike. Sometimes it is a slow, crushing weight. Caleb, or rather Robert Vance, was the first to face his fate. The federal judge showed no leniency for a career predator who targeted military assets. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole for at least 10. The suit was gone, replaced by a beige uniform that washed out his fake tan. He was now just inmate number 8940, a man who had traded his freedom for a gamble he was never going to win. Darius managed to avoid a long prison sentence by testifying against Caleb, but his punishment was perhaps even more fitting for a man who thought he was too good to work. The court ordered him to pay massive monthly restitution fees to the Department of Defense. To make those payments, my brother, who once mocked my uniform as thuggish, took a job as a sanitation worker for the city. I saw him once from a distance, hanging off the back of a garbage truck at 5 in the morning. He looked exhausted, his face streaked with grime, lifting heavy bags of other people as trash. Every paycheck he earned was immediately garnished, leaving him with just enough to rent a basement room and eat instant noodles. He was spending his days cleaning up filth, which felt like poetic justice for the mess he had made of his life. And Tiffany. She did not stick around to be the supportive wife of a garbage man. She proved exactly who she was the moment the money ran out. She filed for divorce, defaulted on her share of the debt, and fled the state. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was in Miami, hanging on the arm of a retired car dealership owner, spinning a new web of lies about being a victim of a wealthy family, is collapse. She had learned nothing, but she was no longer my problem. The quietest tragedy, however, was my mother. The government seized the family home to cover the legal fees and damages. She was evicted from the house where she raised us, the house she had betrayed me to keep. She ended up in a subsidized one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town, miles away from her garden and her bridge club. I was sitting in my office at the base reviewing shipping manifests when my personal phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down at the screen. The caller ID read Mom. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I imagined her sitting in that cramped apartment, staring at a blank wall, realizing that Caleb was gone. The money was gone, and the daughter she sacrificed was the only stability she had left. She was calling to apologize. She was calling to beg. She was calling because the silence of her own making was too loud to bear. I did not reach for the phone. I did not feel anger anymore, but I did not feel obligation either. That cord had been cut the night she sat in the truck. I pressed the side button, silencing the call, and then I opened the settings menu. I scrolled down to her number and selected block caller. The phone stopped buzzing. I took a deep breath, picked up my pen, and went back to work. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, I was finally at peace. Here is the script for segment 34, written in English, strictly adhering to your formatting and content requirements for AI voiceover. The morning sun hit the corrugated steel of Warehouse 17, but it no longer looked like the gray, imposing fortress that had trapped my family in their own greed. It gleamed with fresh white paint and the vibrant blue logo of Carter Logistics. The scars of the raid, the broken sensors, and the damaged doors had all been erased. In their place stood a facility that was not just restored, but evolved. I stood on the loading dock, the very spot where Darius had struggled with the bolt cutters in the rain. Today, the sky was a piercing, limitless blue. Standing across from me was not a federal agent or a desperate relative, but a three-star general from the Defense Logistics Agency. He handed me a digital tablet displaying a contract that would have made my father's heart burst with pride. "This expands your jurisdiction to the entire tri-state area," Lieutenant the General said, shaking my hand. "We need operators we can trust. And after what you did to protect the integrity of the supply chain, we know this facility is ironclad." I signed the screen. With that digital signature, I didn't just secure a business deal. I secured a legacy. We were doubling our square footage. We were hiring 50 new veterans to run the floor. The warehouse wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I turned to the man standing quietly in the shadow of the doorway. Mr. Henderson was wearing a new suit, looking uncomfortable but dignified. He had been the gatekeeper for 20 years, the invisible man my mother and Caleb had walked past without a second glance. "Mr. Henderson," I said, walking over to him, "I am going to be deploying to Germany for real this time. I cannot run this floor from overseas." He looked at me confused. "Who is going to run it then, Dom?" "You are," I said, handing him a heavy set of magnetic keycards. "You are the new facility manager. Full benefits, double the salary, and a reserved parking spot." His eyes welled up. He looked at the keys, then at me. "Dom, I am just a security guard." "No," I corrected him. "You are the man who stood by me when my own blood turned against me. You are the man who protected this house. That makes you the most qualified person I know." He took the keys, his hands shaking, and for the first time, he stood a little taller. I watched him turn to the crew, barking out orders with a new authority, a smile playing on his lips. The workers cheered for him, clapping him on the back. There was laughter on the loading dock. There was music playing from a radio. There was the honest, rhythmic sound of hard work and mutual respect. I took a step back and looked at the scene. For the last 6 months, I had walked around with a hollow ache in my chest, mourning the loss of the people I shared DNA with. I thought I had been orphaned by their betrayal. I thought I was alone in this world. But as I watched Mr. Henderson laugh with the new recruits, as I saw the general nod in approval, and as I felt the solid ground of my father represents legacy beneath my boots, the ache vanished. I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had simply pruned the dead branches so the tree could live. I looked at the bustling warehouse one last time before heading to my car. I had found my people. They were not defined by birth certificates or shared last names. They were defined by honor, by loyalty, and by the choice to show up when it mattered. I smiled, put on my sunglasses, and walked away. I finally had a family that would never let me down. The most profound lesson from Dominique's journey is that family is defined by loyalty and respect, not merely by shared DNA. We are often raised to believe that we must endure anything for the sake of blood relations, but this story illustrates the danger of that mindset. Caleb, Darius, and Tiffany were driven by a toxic sense of entitlement, believing that Dominique's hard-earned success was a communal resource for them to exploit. Their greed blinded them to the reality that trust is a currency far more valuable than money. Dominique's victory teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of malice, it is an act of self-preservation. By refusing to enable their destructive behavior, she didn't just protect her father's legacy, she protected her own dignity. The narrative serves as a stark reminder that we are not obligated to set ourselves on fire just to keep others warm, especially when those people are the ones holding the matches. True family are the people who stand beside you in the trenches, not the ones who wait at the finish line to take the trophy. What about you? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments below.